My name is Niamh McCann. I'm here exhibiting in the MAC in Belfast over the 3 floors with the exhibition Someone Decides Hawk or Dove, which is a long form project that really has taken a number of years in development and has rolled from Germany to France and Paris and to Boyne Valley and Meath. So really it's a research-based project that has taken many years of development. The title Someone Decides Hawk or Dove is a line from a Ciarán Carson poem whose influence is threaded throughout the exhibition and pieces of work, both in terms of the approach to a doubling and a reflection and an interest in the locality and specificity of Belfast landscape and material. And then that reflected in the way I work, and then equally in an interest in engagement with the existence of a border within the small island of Ireland, and that having a very, very clear consequence for people on an individual basis, but also on a larger scale in terms of a social conflict, mix and separation across personal situations, but maybe even also within national divides that speak to greater common concerns across many countries, nations, worlds, really. Someone Decides Hawk or Dove really is a very personal reflection of this existence of a border on a small island, and I'm taking that from my position as an Irish Dublin-based person, kind of in some ways separated but very, very affected emotionally and otherwise, and I guess even psychologically, in terms of the makeup of that bordering situation. It is a project that in many forms has been sitting under the umbrella of the Decade of Centenaries commemoration. So the institutionalisation of this border within the island of Ireland, but also the institutionalisation of the Republic of Ireland as a country in and of itself. And the works speak to those crossovers of the very personal and then the larger concerns of national identities, etc. And then I'm very conscious within, again, this relationship to Carson of the poetic reflections on the destructive powers of empire, colonization, the artifacts that are taken as read and actually absolutely looking to deflect and question the assumed knowledge withheld within artifacts and those debris. I feel kind of hesitant to call it exhibition because it's definitely a body of work that's travelled. It's travelled from Meath, Washington DC, Germany, France, and in each location it's taken a different form, or the story has been reconfigured to very much sit within those different galleries and locations outdoors in the Battle of the Boyne Heritage Site in Meath. Here in the MAC, it's over the 3 floors. So in the sunken gallery, we have a projected moving image film that's called Hairline Crack, another nod to Carson. And in this film, there's a dog without eyes, an eyeless beast, who wanders through 3 different locations. One, the National History Museum in Dublin, where he is overseen by these stuffed dead eyeless or eyed animals, but non-seeing animals. The second location is in blocks of flats in Dublin, which I was thinking of archetypal also flats or blocks that would exist in Belfast circa 1970 to 2000, or different locations around the United Kingdom. And the third location is the Kilmashogue burial site in Dublin Mountains, and this is a Bronze Age burial location. I think in fact is quite a complex structure underneath the ground. You can see edges and borders and structures, but grown over by moss and trees. So it really a very old place, and kind of speaks of that old spirituality. It's quite magical, and yet obviously also of man-made structures. Interspersed with those wanderings are 2 songs, Glan Volcan and Yoran Song, and these are to sung texts, which we hear are nodded to in the other floors, sung by Iarla Ó Leonard and Ciara Conway, with original music composition by Iarla. And this is a song of Sweeney or Sivna speaking across the border of madness and love of landscape and into a place where he is disconnected and yet still urging for connection to his wife or this woman who speaks to him, and yet they're speaking to each other from a place of dissonance at all times in a very beautiful way. And that wandering of Colin through these spaces for me is very much hitting those touchstones of the archetype, the eyeless seer, the ancient mythological figure who has this innate knowledge that is freewheeling but also kind of very deeply set within a landscape in a very, very rooted place. The fact that it is a sightless dog is kind of touching off those artifacts or mythological stories where we have these beasts or birds or animals who show us the way. I'm actually equally thinking of Ulysses or, you know, other Fionn McCool stories where there's tales of history being told through the fictional moments, but also kind of in parallel to these, or in parallel to our more assumed specific histories and identities. So in some ways I see Colin as the archetype, but also I want to see him as the very specifically that dog with no eyes who can negotiate around trees and over Bronze Age burial cairns with aplomb and ease, and he is deflecting our assumptions as to human capabilities by proving himself to be more capable and actually more in tune with all these landscapes than mankind most often or very often is. So in the tall gallery, there are a series of more concise objects, the pygmy hippo and a bird on a Jesmonite plinth. There is a number of neon works. There's a number of polished brass pieces called incidents, which I think of as a sentence or a poetic phrase, and very much again in keeping with the rhythmic identity that I would see within Kieran Carson's work, or this idea of poetic reflection where you're literally looking into it, but or bisected in your head. So it's working with architectures, but also with cadence and rhythm and visual text. In the tallest part of the tall gallery, the back room, there is a lambeg drum and a second piece called confetti. Confetti, which is, I guess, what I would call sprayed over the back wall of that tall space, is a series of silver-plated bricks, specifically imperial bricks, so bricks that have a very, very particular size, and a used one, so it's got its mortar and an edge banked off it, etc. It's the type of brick that you might see in a Belfast terrace or in a Dublin terrace or in a Birmingham terrace, but also possibly in other locations around the world in which the imperial brick would have been exported to or built with. And that piece, confetti, refers to confetto, the little rice or thing that you throw in celebration of a marriage or a wedding, or in celebration of communion or union of people. So the silver ornateness of the bricks is kind of doing that. It's really kind of attracting some celebration and seduction, I guess, in the material itself. The brick, and particularly the way that it's installed, it's like a split second of this single brick traveling through space. So I think of it as a freeze frame of a brick over 10 frames. So it becomes a projectile. So it's also a thing that can be thrown and at riots or places of conflict, and it becomes that thing in tension with the confetto. So it's a marriage reunion, but also a projectile or something that causes potential harm or is used to cause conflict or is part of that conflict. And yet it's also brick, it's foundational. It kind of forms a wall, forms a building. It's very, very literally what things are built of in terms of basic housing, and most often domestic housing situations. So I kind of wanted all those stories contained within that work, in that it's seductive and attractive and kind of funny, and yet in tension with the potential aggression of the thing falling and hitting through space. In front of that we have a lambeg drum, which is a gorgeous object, and then also something which I know, because I've had this reaction a number of times when I've had this piece in a studio or walking in and out of studio, causes quite a visceral reaction in many ways, in that it's a musical instrument that has become associated and aligned with tribal identity within the particular, well, very particular arena of Northern Ireland life and politics, with marches on the 12th, etc. And there feels like there's an absolute ownership of the lambeg drum within particular communities, or maybe even more specifically, a lack of ownership from others. So I wanted to retrieve this drum back into a place where it becomes the musical instrument it is, a drum, a thing that plays, and it is again about communion and marching and a celebration in various kinds. And that it becomes a metaphor itself, and largely it will sit silent. So I wanted to have the drum that bangs the drum become something that is more silent, sculptural, and in some ways a softer object. Though having said that, if people want to bang the drum while it's in the gallery, they are very welcome to do so. It will make a fantastic noise. The insignia in the drum, again, I worked with a guy, Andy Young, a lovely man who lives in Rich Hill and has a long tradition of marching on the 12th of July, and also of making drums. He's a musical instrument drum maker, largely lambeg drums, though his grandfather also made barons for traditional music players in south and north of the border. So again, it's a bit more knotted than one would initially assume. And I guess his story is partly in that object too, which I think it's very important to mention his making within that. But I have gone and repainted the insignia, so instead of another figurehead, perhaps with an orange sash or crossing a river on a horse or something like that, what we have is a pygmy hippo and a couple of seagulls as the main insignia on the body of the drum. And on the rims there are chicken nuggets and a flower from the same place that the pygmy hippo is from. And maybe this is the point where I can just talk a little bit about the pygmy hippo, because a pygmy hippo is an object that is on all floors in various guises. In the sunken gallery, we have a three-headed shamrock, kind of messed up pygmy hippo on a plinth. In the upper gallery, I will mention there's a pygmy hippo spliced with a root, so a weird object. And here, this pygmy hippo was an object I came across in the Trinity College zoology department on a shelf, with a little card beside it, which told of the story of this specimen being taken from the banks of a river in Sierra Leone through London and making its way to Dublin in the late 1800s. It made its way to Dublin because the British protectorate leader, I don't know what the official title is, but anyway, the guy in charge there for the British government had an Irish connection. So he was given this beast, and it made its way to Dublin, and it died very soon after it arrived into Dublin. It was cold, and they didn't know how to take care of it and all those things. So first of all, I was like, oh my God, well, that's the story again of colonialism, and that's a sort of story of empire building, as you take things and you take beasts and you take people, all of those very, very difficult conversations are in evidence in this little specimen. She is also the reason that pygmy hippo have been named pygmy hippo. She's very, very specifically an object that's been scientifically classified or started off that body of knowledge related to pygmy hippos, of which they are very proud. I have a more ambiguous or complicated relationship to that body of knowledge. I'm sure the people in Sierra Leone also had a name for the beast. So anyway, that pygmy hippo is a motif. I wanted to both retrieve her from that place of a debris into kind of a more of a raised artifact, or even that she is given a place that has equal, if not more, value to those other figureheads we see around in various statues, flags, etc., places in our built landscape. So she's on the lambeg drum, which is definitely not something that usually these things get decorated with. And I kind of, that squishing together of those two worlds to me also makes perfect sense. That they speak of the same histories and they speak of the same urge towards division and conflict, etc. And yet I kind of want to look towards some possibility of redemptive power, that at least there's a reflection going on with those coexistences. To lead up to the upper gallery, the uppermost space in the MAC, it's a beautiful, very classical museum gallery space, a large rectangular white museum type space, which as you raise up or walk up the stairs, you see that expanse in one go. So in that space there's a few pieces, and maybe speak to a couple of them. Turn Again, which is a furniture, location, seat, mixture of all those things, which I worked up with architect Peter O'Carroll. It's a piece that you can sit upon. There's a seat in the middle that looks somewhere between a confessional and a love seat, and definitely looks to speak to those things. A series of benches, or two benches, that again you can sit on or occupy for your time in the upper gallery. There is again song and music that sings across those spaces, so you will hear Diane Volcan, Iarlón Leonard speaking, and Ciara Conway speaking across or singing across those spaces, and interjections of Lala Roddy speaking some of the text that you hear in the sunken gallery. So again, there's very much, each piece is threaded throughout all floors. So the upper gallery, you almost experience, or want you to experience, as a totality. It is distinct works. There's Turn Again that you can sit in or sit upon, but you're also immersed in the song or music, which kind of very gently is directional, but also washes over you, and take in brass plates that have screen prints of Colin in the National History Museum, and a view of Kilmashogue, that are kind of pictorial and again reflective backdrops to that work. So they can be seen as single pieces, but they're really there to be experienced as a whole. And maybe one last note with that is that each piece is taken, or I'd say the pieces as a whole, take a very architectural and reflective and sensitive relationship to the architecture of the space and the architecture of the map. So kind of bisecting walls and almost drawing in space with the benches and the seats. So the theme is there, but also they're sitting in relationship to doors and windows and lights, perspective taking you into the room, so that becomes almost a bit calming, whilst again that tension of the actual subject is allowed to play out.